guys, and welcome. We will get started in a few minutes. Let's give people some time to join in. I think we had 10 plus-ish people agreeing that this time would work for them. It didn't work, unfortunately, for everybody. But, let's wait a few minutes to make sure that everybody who will come is here, actually. Okay, so we're gonna wait, I guess, one more minute, and then we'll get going.
You can hear me.
Yeah, maybe this is actually who we're gonna get. I actually recounted, and so there was 10 people signing up, and I know one of them, Martin, unfortunately could not make it because some other things came up. So 9 that we have now is actually what we should have. So I think we are complete from that sense.
Looks like it's working now. I can figure out which mic.
Your audio was very low, Russ.
Okay, is that better?
Much better,
Yeah,
yes.
I can. Yeah, I can turn it up some.
Good. So welcome. This is the Model-T program meeting. We had one in December. We had some smaller discussions during the winter, and some discussion on the list. And now we have sort of a proper call and can discuss where we are and what needs to be done and where we're making progress, or if you're not making progress in some areas. Thank you for joining. And I don't have a huge agenda for this meeting. It was basically just to go over 2 separate areas of work that we've been discussing since December. And one area was this, what we call the principal documents. These are documents that, for instance, the IAB has published in recent years that talk about some aspect of internet's evolution, and then discusses some guidelines or recommendations what we need to do in order to accommodate a need or address an issue, and they usually are pretty short and pretty high level. They don't try to cover everything, and so there's a couple of those documents been discussed in the group. One by Martin, one by me. And then we have the more general question of what should we do with the documentation of the threat model. And there's been some discussion. There is a document, Mark, right? You did say on email today that you didn't publish an update, but you did make one update in January, I think, but not one after that.
Yeah, that's right. So hi, everyone. I sent around notes earlier today about our January meeting. I did update my own draft, but I think when we get around to talking about it, Yari, I think my draft isn't really along the lines that we agreed in January. And so even though I did update it, and I really updated it in front of 113, I think what we need to do, and I think what we sort of agreed to do, was take that work in a slightly different direction. But we can talk about that when it comes time.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. We also had another draft from Vittorio that was discussed a bit on the list, and I think that belongs more in this threat model changes category than.
Yeah. So yeah,
the principles.
I didn't know what you want me to do with my suggestions for the one draft that I make comments on.
I'm sorry, which draft was that?
So Mark, go ahead. I'll ask Gary later.
Okay, so any comments on this sort of agenda piece that, like, let's discuss the two topics are the principles and the threat model documentation. Is that the agenda, or do we need some additional items?
Yeah, I had made some comments on the Model T draft that I sent the IAB list. I didn't know, or the Model T list a while back, a couple of 3 weeks. I didn't know if there was you wanted me to do anything with those comments or not.
Let's take them up when we go to the relevant section. Okay. on the agenda. And indeed, this is not supposed to be like a presentation of the documents or any of that sort. It's going to be an interactive discussion, for people who have thoughts on these topics or have read the drafts and have comments or have contributed something but feel that we're not there yet, or feel that we are ready to do something, and so on. So maybe briefly introduce where we are and what the feeling of the participants is, at least from the point of view of the program leads or the document authors, but then the rest of it is really up to everybody to discuss. So maybe we'll just start. I will try and take a little bit of notes on the side if I can, so please do enough discussion that I can actually take some notes and not try to speak myself too much. If we go to the principles documents, I guess the feeling is that there's been some progress there. So there's a couple documents. Draft Thomson TMI and then draft ARCO IAB data minimization. And both of them have been reviewed at least a little bit, not enough, but somewhat, and there's been revisions. Martin and I discussed this yesterday. He was unable to make today's call, but I was able to call him yesterday, and he felt that we are making some progress, and we're not quite there yet for sort of broader consumption and review, but we could be. Maybe the key thing is for us in this group, the Model T members and you guys on the call, to do more reviews of these documents. Where are we with them? Do we agree on what's being said and so on? And just as a sort of a reminder what we are talking about. These are indeed very narrow documents that's not supposed to be covering the entire space of threat landscape changes and so forth. They are supposed to look at a very specific issue and make some recommendations with respect to that. So my document, for instance, is simply taking the well-known principle of only provide information on a need-to-know basis and describe how that applies to the current situation and make some recommendations on how to take that into account in protocol design and deployment. So it's really somewhat obvious perhaps, but unfortunately we are in a situation where some of these things need to be said, and we do have fair bit of data collection going on the internet, and we need to make sure that we're not unnecessarily divulging information that we should not be sending, and that's the essence of that draft. There's been some revisions of it. It was originally a little bit more broad, and with Martin's input, it's now more focused on this data minimization aspect and this need-to-know basis principle. And then Martin's document talks about a different topic, which is about intermediaries in protocol design and deployment, and how we need to limit the use of intermediaries and make a very explicit decision when you are using an intermediary and what information you give to it and what roles you give to it. And it's also, yeah, you could argue that it's relatively straightforward. It's a little bit longer than my draft was, but it's quite short and punchy still. So those are the two documents. And maybe the next step here is that we need to get them in good enough shape that they could be reviewed more broadly. Some of the issues in working on these topics is that you have a relatively small set of people looking at documents, like within this program, for instance. And there isn't always necessarily broader review of people who think in different ways or think about stuff from a totally different angle, and that we do need to get at some point. But in order to get to that, the documents need to be in good enough shape to be distributed more widely, for instance, on the architecture discuss list and so forth. So maybe one action item here is to make sure that, like, if we have any feedback today, or if we could get some people to commit to doing a review in the next couple of weeks on these documents, then that would be a useful step forward, perhaps. That's the intro that I was planning to have. So maybe now sort of more free-form discussion of what do you think about these documents and where we are and what could be improved, and do they make sense at all to begin with, and are these the right documents, or are the principles that should be documented, and so on. Go ahead, Mark.
I don't mind being brave here and being the first one. I like the idea of the two documents, and without doing a spoiler, I think that they could have a matching pair of documents in the threat model series, or whatever we're doing with the threat model. The reason I say that is I think that we've all sort of come to an agreement, very gradually, but sort of all come to an agreement that the best way to go about this work is to find tightly constrained topics on which to make coherent and useful statements, and practical and useful statements, right? And so the architecture, the principles documents, I think, are very valuable, especially when they're tightly focused and constrained. And I think they could be, and we did some work about a year ago. There are some individual drafts that are focused on threats related to individual technology. So there's sort of a matching pair of documents that could be easily put together in the threat model series, which I'll talk about later. I would be happy to be one of the volunteers to do a review in the coming weeks. That's certainly something I'd be happy to help with. But in terms of the documents, there's two things that I really like. I think, first of all, I think over time we've come to believe that we need relatively focused pieces of work and not grand architectural visions, because I think there's a group of us that don't believe that we'll ever come to real agreement on grand architectural visions related to the Model T goals. The second thing is, I think these two particular topics fit well both in terms of principle statements and also an analysis of how they changed the threat model in RFC 3552. And I think I'll come back and talk about that later, obviously. So I'm very supportive of these two documents, as not just supportive of them as two documents, but supportive of them as a way to move the Model T work forward into something that's practical and useful.
Thanks, Mark. Other thoughts or additional thoughts? You can speak just to volunteer also, or even write on the chapter.
Yeah. Hey, this is Joe. I also like the approach of the kind of more focused documents. I think it is a way to make better progress. I haven't had a chance to look at the documents in detail, but I could commit to review them over the next couple of weeks. And what I have seen, I like. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. More thoughts? And just remember that these two documents were, written by their authors, and who felt strongly about the particular thing that they were writing about. That doesn't mean that they would be the only possible set of things to discuss or document, or the only possible principles that we should highlight. So it's possible that there's some other ones. Elliot, go ahead. At least I cannot hear you.
I hit the wrong button. I'm sorry about that.
No, we can.
So let me take this down. My apologies. Good evening to you. Good afternoon to people west of me. The two documents you're talking about at this point are TMI and your document, or am I missing it? I apologize for joining late. I had difficulties finding the meeting.
Yeah, those were the two documents. I can post the links also on the chat window if that's helpful.
Okay, so I'd say Martin's document, at least from my perspective, needs a little bit of work. I think people have a misunderstanding of intermediaries in a lot of ways, and there's so many more of them than I think even Martin realizes, and he's usually the brightest person in any room that he's in. So I think that document could go. There's an exploration that's hiding there, right? If you look and you see how, and it relates a little bit to Mark's document on centralization, right? I was talking about this there. And I don't want to get into, I think you're having a meta discussion. I could get into the meat of this, and I maybe this isn't the right time for that. But I do like the idea of, going on two tracks, right? One is, I think we talked about focus issues, and maybe we keep it at focus issues, but the problem with being too focused is that things get scattered everywhere. We end up with these onesie-twosie documents. And then when we try to hand that back to the IETF or something like that, here's a dozen documents, make sense of them. So we got to be a little careful about that.
Yeah, it turns out the chapter room doesn't exist. I don't know if anybody knows how to fix that. But anyway, Elliot, thank you for that. I think we could get into the meat of this. This is a perfect opportunity to get into not just the meta discussion, but also the nitty-gritty details. I do agree that the one question around Martin's document is on the definition of an intermediary, and we've had some discussion already on that on the list. I think the new version is pretty good about that, but that's the area where it is relatively easy to get into our arguments or discussions of, have we nailed the definition well enough, or even if there is an exact definition to begin with.
I'm sorry, Yadi. I just realized, and now I need to apologize. I just realized that Martin isn't on the call, and for that reason alone, I would be very reticent to go into the meat, because I think he ought to be here to defend his own ideas. And I realize that we can't be beholden to one individual schedule, but he is the document author.
Yeah, I think he would appreciate feedback. So I don't think you should hold back. We all realize that he's not here. He was unable to make it because some other commitments at like a inappropriate time for him. So if we do have feedback, then by all means bring it up, and we'll write it down and record, and
what I was
discuss it later as well.
I could just do, but I could just easily send it to the list, and I just don't. I'll tell you what I don't want. I don't want to feel like it's beating on him when he's not here, and that's the thing. I wouldn't want that if I weren't here. So that's why I feel a little uncomfortable about this. I think let's beat on your document.
Yeah. That's totally fair game. But also, posting on the list is perfect also. That's a good way to bring up things. So it's not that I'm against that, but I don't think you should hold back either. He's not going to take it negatively either.
All right, here's what I will commit to send some comments to the list about it, but that much you can have. I would just rather give back the time when we can do that on the list, so that he has an opportunity to really participate in a back and forth, if that's okay with people.
Okay. Yeah, could you commit to reading the other one, my document, unless you already read it?
I have, but it's been a little while.
Okay.
So I made some suggestions on the minimization. Is that what you're talking about, Yai?
Yes.
List a while back, which I PM'd you a link to those, and then I saw the email from Martin, and I was looking at it as well. I think it's a good document. I think it needs to be expanded, cover more stuff, but I think at base it's a good document.
Mine or Martin's? Russ, I failed to understand if you were talking about my document or Martin's document.
Oh, yours, I think. I don't think it's okay. Martin's.
Minimization versus intermediaries. Which one is it?
Oh, minimization. Is that Martin's
Okay,
document?
that's mine.
Okay.
And I would post the links, but chat window
No,
doesn't
no,
work.
no, it's fine. Yeah. No, I was just looking at the list here and looking at Martin's comments on the minimization document as well.
Yeah, and Martin is, yeah, he has contributed quite a bit on the minimization. Or at least the latest revision is basically according to his suggestion on what we should focus on. So he's had a major impact on that. But if there's any problems, then those are mine, and mine only.
So I do have, hi everybody, by the way. I do have one question. So we have this principles for intermediates, and we have the minimization, and then the IAB also has adopted this document for pass signals collaboration, which you're also IARI. And I think there is some overlap between all these three documents. So I wonder how these things fit together.
It's a really good question. I think there is a relationship, at least. I wouldn't say that they're sort of totally overlapping. They have a very specific focus also, but they are related.
No,
They
so
do
yeah,
refer
so
to each
they
other.
have a different angle. But I mean, Martin's document also has these principles for intermediates, and like pass signals means you're talking to an intermediate. That's like, and it's about how you design the signals and the mechanisms to talk to the intermediates. And Martin's document is a little bit more maybe about. It's actually kind of very similar in that sense that you like how to handle intermediates, how to select them. That's maybe an aspect that's like not part of the pass signals draft. But for example, there's a section on limiting information exposure. So that's something that shows up in all three documents.
Yep. It does.
And the point is, I mean, those documents can be read and stand on its own, but if we want to publish all of them on the IAB stream, I think they actually have to fit together and tell the same story.
Yeah, but there's also important distinctions. So one thing that's the case for the data minimization document and the pass signals is that the pass signals really is about like, well, how do you communicate with elements on the path or some intermediary type things that you need in order to perform your whatever function you're doing. But the data minimization draft actually talks about the primary protocol participant. So it's about data minimization, not just towards the networks, but also to the server.
Yeah, so I think the data minimization is a very nice principle, and I think there was already feedback on the list that you could bring the draft even more to the point, because that's kind of a very basic signal principle, which is, as you said, to endpoints, but like to everybody you talk to. It doesn't matter if it's intermediate or an endpoint or whatever. It's a general principle. And I'm happy to publish that. I think that is useful to write this down clearly, and it's something we can rely on in the pass signals draft. So that relation fits kind of well together. I think I'm more not concerned, but I'm really want to understand how the intermediate draft from Martin fits in here.
Okay, and at the very least, it should be clearer perhaps than it is today, like how these different documents fit together and what they're speaking about and not speaking about, how they relate to each other.
Yeah.
Okay, Elliot.
So I actually do have some comments on your document, and one of I have a question, and it's really not just for you. It's a good question for the room, right? Which is you talk about data minimization and the principle of least privilege. Now, I think everybody here can buy into the principle of least privilege, but the question then is, does principle of least privilege translate directly into data minimization? And the reason I ask the question is because some of us actually have to operate this stuff. And when you're trying to operate, things go wrong. And then the question becomes, do you have enough information to figure out what the problem is? And I had this question just today. We were designing an interesting federated protocol, and so we could have. We were talking about what we wanted to return in some instances. We were talking. Well, we have this UUID that's sort of hanging out there. Should we provide that? And should we provide certain values? And I said, well, if we don't, right, people are going to go chasing these things down, and you won't have, you won't have the information that you need when you want to debug things. And there was another instance where the information could have changed in flight. And so I know this sounds a little all over the map, but what the conversation turned into was a question about principle of least. Did we violate the principle of least privilege by providing information back? And the answer was no, we didn't, but we provided a lot of information back, but the person we provided that information was entitled to have that information. So the question is, should we be talking about data minimization, or should we be talking about data authorization? And there's this whole operational aspect that I just ask people to think about, like, if you minimize too much, it's impossible to run the show. That all of a sudden you have this and you talk a little bit about, I think towards the end, you talk about dealing with compromise, right? But that wasn't the compromise I was thinking about. I was thinking about how is it that, we have to decide what we want, what you need for purposes of operational stability. So I'll stop there.
So Elliot, I think if you minimize too much, then you did it wrong, right? So minimization means really sending the minimum amount of information that is needed to actually fulfill the function you're looking for.
Okay, so yes, but do you know at the time what you need to minimize, right? This is, again, sometimes the operational experience is what tells you what you need, right? And this was especially true when we go back, eons ago. It's why we have so much information in the SMTP headers, is because we needed it, right? But we didn't know what we needed when we needed it, because the paths were so circuitous and things just broke. And this does happen.
Yeah, so I think the answer there is make a way to take it out, and then when you find you don't need it, so that you can minimize later. A second answer there is think through how long the information needs to exist on the receiving side, and are there ways to aggregate it and depersonalize it so it's no longer really PII in the system. Those aren't really protocol questions necessarily, but they are questions that need to be answered. You definitely need to allow the data to be taken out when you realize you don't need it.
Yeah, I like that point, Russ. I think that's a great one to capture, that if you need to provide information for debugging, make sure that you can, and especially at the application layers, it's a big struggle always to do things below the application layer, but at the application layer for sure, right? And I really like that idea of taking it out. Once it hits the server, then I think we have some challenges as to what control we actually have.
Yeah, and like my understanding of the document is that it's basically saying the opposite. So you, instead of just like broadcasting all kind of information and figure out if you need them or not, and then try to remove them later, you should really piece by piece figure out what you need and then provide this information and like in whatever way you provide it, you want to design a protocol to be extensible and whatever, so you can provide more information if needed later, or you can have some negotiation. But like, this is a different document. So this document is really arguing against just like providing a broad set of information without knowing what you need it for.
Right. I think that's a very fair point, Mira. So all I'm suggesting, I think, is to understand, you know, what is it? Occam's razor, find the solution that is simplest, but is as simple as possible, but no simpler, right? Find the amount of information that you need, but, you know, don't provide less, and maybe provide a way to have more. I think having some of that discussion about operational considerations and what is needed to actually, you know, debug things, and you may not know initially what that information is, and have a way to actually incorporate it later, is a perfectly fine way to do that.
Yeah, and I agree with where this discussion is sort of heading to, and Russ's comments and so forth, and Occam's razor and so on. I think the theory is pretty clear that like you should give enough information for somebody to do their job, the whole job, and not just sort of the immediate step, but also all the operational stuff that goes with it. But that's only the theory, and then in practice we'll get into arguments about, well, do you really need that piece, and you know, how valuable is your additional debugging thing, and should you really have it, or should we do it instead, and so on. So the practice is the difficult piece, but yeah, extensible protocols and being able to provide more information and making an explicit decision about those things that you provide is I think the key here. I am looking at the clock though. We have some room for more people to comment on this topic. If other people who haven't commented yet have thoughts on the principles, then speak up now. Otherwise, we'll move to the second section of the meeting.
Maybe just summarize what the plan is from here. It sounds like we need more discussion on Martin Dock's document with Martin at some point, but for the minimization, we could actually kind of move ahead and bring it to the IAB, or where do you think we are?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. So feedback that you gave today, we can take into account, and Elliot at least will be sending some email soon, and so Martin can participate in that discussion. And we also called for more reviewers. At least Mark, Joe, and Elliot signed up, and if other people can, please say so now. And once we have those reviews in, and then we'll turn new versions of the two drafts. And Martin and I will discussing that once we have that, then we are ready to go to architecture discuss and see what the broader set of people thinks about this. And after that, it might be time for IAB adoption, assuming people like the documents, of course.
So do you, so I can also sign up for reviewing the minimization draft. That's on my list anyway. Do you think these documents have some kind of a dependency and they need to move together, or are they actually separate?
I think they're separate
Okay.
enough at least.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I don't see anybody else on the queue, so maybe it's time to move to the threat model documentation discussion. Mark, do you want to lead that?
Thanks, Jari. Happy to. Let me do a little bit of scene setting, and then I'll sort of open the floor, I think. Back in December, we agreed to sort of break up into two design teams. Is too fancy a term for it, but two small groups of people to focus on two different tasks for Model T. One was a set of architectural principles, and we've just been talking about a couple documents that fit under that rubric. And then there was another group of people who were very interested in talking about the internet threat model as it's currently documented in RFC 3552, but also in other documents as well, and what should be done, if anything should be done. And so that second group, I agreed to bring people together. And we got together at the end of January to have a call about that. And so that call was about 75 minutes long. It was pretty productive. And I sent around some notes, but let me sort of tell you what the four main takeaways were. First of all, there seemed to be general agreement that the threat model that's in RFC 3552 deserves some sort of analysis, some thought. It shouldn't just be left alone. But there was also agreement, and pretty broad agreement, that it would be very difficult in the current landscape to do a biz on 3552, to actually do a wholesale revision of that document to reflect the current internet threat model. There were all sorts of reasons given for that. You can look through the notes to see the discussion. But what was really interesting was there also emerged sort of a general agreement that one of the reasons that it would be hard to ever do a replacement for 3552 is because the threat model is always changing, that we're seeing both the endpoints and the connectivity on the internet evolve to meet new needs, evolve to meet new use cases and so forth. And so the threat model evolves all the time. So one of the questions, and I'm very, very happy that there's several people from the IAB here. One of the things that was suggested was that we reach out to the IAB and see whether or not, instead of doing a full-scale rewrite of RFC 3552, instead do a much shorter, more focused architectural statement, which says something along the lines that the internet's threat model is constantly evolving, and the reason that it's evolving, and give some examples. And the reason that it's evolving is because, of course, we're inventing new protocols, we have new use cases, we have new mechanisms by which we connect endpoints together, and so forth. So one of the takeaways in January was to come back to the IAB and say, would the IAB be willing to develop and talk about a short document that was an architectural statement that talked about how the threat model is constantly evolving. So this is not about the principles. This is directly about the threat model. And I'm so happy that there are people from the IAB here because we can just ask them to their face what they think about such an idea. The second thing, the fourth thing, but the second to-do action from the January call was there was general agreement to take kind of the same approach that Yari's principles idea of breaking things into smaller, more targeted, more focused discussions, in this case on the threat model, not on the principles, and actually take those focused areas and develop separate documents for those. Now it runs into one of the problems Mira talked about, which is, well, how do you get them all to work together? How do you make sure that they don't overlap? And there are problems like that. But there was general agreement that it would be useful and much easier to address the threat model by particular components or particular chunks, as it were. And some people on the January call suggested that maybe even spinning up a research group would be the right thing to do. Other people thought short, focused documents that went into the security area in the IETF was the right thing to do. And so we basically came down to the conclusion that the right way to proceed here for Model T was to break the topic up into smaller areas, smaller chunks of, not try to do a big landscape document about the internet threat model, but instead to take particular areas. And the areas could be the impact of intermediaries, say on the threat model, right? Or the impact of nodes on the internet that have lesser capabilities, like the Internet of Things, for instance, and talk about the threat model surrounding that particular area. Now, about a year ago, I had done an internet draft that started going down that path, and since we can't put links in the Jammern room here, you can find it you can find it in the data tracker if you look for my name. I think they're still active. Anyway, if they're not, I'll revive them. But I think for this fourth thing of breaking up the threat model into component parts, that's the part where I'd like to have a little discussion today. I would also love it if the IAB were interested in talking a little bit about the potential for making an architectural statement about the threat model, a very short one, a very focused one that only says basically that it's continuously evolving. It's not a threat model that is static for all points in time. So those are two things I was hoping to get out of today. I'd hoped to have a sort of starter draft for this component thing before IETF 113, but I didn't get that done. So that's something I'll be contributing in the next couple of weeks. So I think, Yari, with that, the two things I'm hoping for is perhaps this group of 10 or 12 people that we have here, maybe talk about, first of all, do people feel comfortable with this idea that we're taking the Model T problem and breaking it up into sort of component, manageable, focused chunks? That would be the first thing. And any IAB person that was willing to say something about whether or not making an architectural statement about the Internet's threat model, I would be interested in that. Obviously, I would help contribute text to that, but I would see that, and I'll just say one more thing, and then I'll turn the group open here. But I think that's the only thing that, in the end, the threat model group thought the IAB should do. Instead, I think that the discussion documents were either researchy or they were things that should come into the security area in the IETF. And with that, Yari, I hope we can throw it open for maybe 5 or 10 minutes of conversation.
Yeah, go ahead. We'll have opinions.
Yeah, maybe I can comment a little bit on what the IAB can do here. And I mean, it's hard to say anything if there's not a document. Like if I would see a document and read it, I can give you a better opinion. But I find the things that the IAB can do most useful if they're in two categories. One category is doing something in order to create discussion in the IETF. And in that category, we very often do things like programs where we interact with the community, but also like workshops are a good tool for that, for like getting attention to a topic and then create a discussion in the community. The other thing we're doing is writing these kind of recommendation documents, and usually these recommendation documents are kind of a little bit some lesson learned about protocol design or what we have experienced in the IETF, and writing it down in a clear statement helps to improve protocol work in the future. And making a statement about just noting that the threat model is evolving, yeah, that might have some architectural impact, but it's not clear what the aim of this document would be. What do you want to achieve? What's the change you want to achieve in the community?
So that's really helpful. The change, of course, is that the threat model that's documented, the only threat model that we have documented in the RFC series, is inaccurate and out of date. And so I think what the IAB could do very usefully, and I think this fits under your idea of doing something to facilitate conversation, is to point that out and explain why that is. And not asking the IAB so much to talk about lessons learned. Here's, for instance, I think there are other ways to have conversations about what the impact of intermediaries are on the network and in security in general, right? But I do think a statement from the IAB that the existing threat model that we have doesn't reflect the reality of the networks we run, and here's why. and the IAB recognizes this. So maybe that is within the two things you talked about what the IAB produces as documents, maybe not. But I think that the group was separating that message from the message about the particulars of the threat model. Does that make sense?
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, like, I think the reason why we have this program is because there is a feeling in the IAB that there's a need to work on this, like that, exactly as you said, that the threat model as we have it is outdated and work is needed, and that's like why we have this program and why we try to foster some discussion in the community. I don't know if like having a more formal statement or whatever would actually change the discussion, because the end goal you want to achieve is, I think you want to update the threat model and you want to make sure that we continuously update the threat model, right? So whatever we do here is just an immediate step. And it doesn't sound to me like having an RFC, which is kind of something that is written in stone and stays there forever, right, might be the right tool for that. But again, like, it's really hard to talk about this without having any written text in front of me.
And I think some of us will go away and try to solve that problem about you not having text in front of you. I'm interested to hear from other people too about the other idea, because there would be some work to go on there. So, and that is the idea of breaking the threat model into components and then doing work on the components rather than a much more general approach that was done 20 years ago.
I would tend to agree with that. In fact, I'm working on a threat tree for some other project I'm working on right now around data center fabrics, and I'm finding it necessary to build the tree in sections because there are different threats to different things.
Okay, thanks for that. Yari.
Yeah, Mark, just to, now I get some echo, by the way. So I kind of agree with Mirja about the general statement. It's we need to write one first before we can say. I personally do see a difference between saying that something is evolving and it's not static, and then specifying exactly what it is now. And I think you were looking for the former, not for the latter. And part of the problem in nailing down the latter in any RFC is that by the time we get the nailing done, it's already changed. So that's not easy. So that's why a more general statement would be useful. But to see if that would actually be reasonable in an IAB document, let's see some text. I personally feel that this component approach is maybe the most promising angle. Of course, the devil is in the details also there. Like, let's see what specific area we're addressing and what do we say. And you also have this question of not overlap. Mirja already raised it for other stuff. So we probably wouldn't want to have like intermediaries discussed again. So it'd have to be maybe something else or different angle. But I personally think that's most helpful. And then Martin and I were discussing it also a little bit on this space, and what he said was that he was also feeling that this complete approach or holistic documentation of everything is challenging, but some more specific efforts might be more feasible. And of course, the details then matter. So let's see the details. We also talked about a third category that you did not mention, and I don't know if that's in the interest of this group or interest of the people at the IETF or IAB, but we talked about sort of documenting the actual changes that are happening in the environment without sort of claiming that as a result of those changes, this is what the threat model should be, but just documenting the actual changes that we're seeing out there in the world. And we've had a number of documents in this category, but we felt that in order to have something that could be published, this feels almost a little bit more like an academic exercise. It should be done in survey style and should not focus on a narrow piece of thing that the authors are interested in. I myself have written some of those documents, and I've had a narrow focus, too narrow focus. But if one did a survey type of thing, let's say by some academic, that would have more chance of surviving. Of course, that type of document does have the issue that it's also changing. Well, the situation is changing all the time, so you can only do it like a snapshot. Okay.
Well, this is helpful. I think I'm conscious of what time it is, Yari. So I think the takeaway here is that to get more specific comments, people would like to see more specific text. So that message has been received. That's fine. I also seem to have the takeaway here that people do think that the specific, more focused approach, if there is going to be a model that succeeds, that's probably the model that succeeds. Anything that's written ought to address Miria's comment about how do you make it practical and useful. I apologize for putting words in her mouth, but that's what I actually wrote down in my notes. The idea here is that it shouldn't duplicate other things, that it shouldn't represent sort of a statement of here's what things are like at this moment in time. But it also needs to do more than say, oh, this is in flux and these things change. And so I know that as a takeaway as well. So let me turn it back over to you, Yari.
Yeah, I just had a few concluding remarks from my side, but there's time for somebody else to say something, particularly people who haven't spoken yet. So do you want to, Victoria, do you want to say anything about your angle on this, for instance?
To be honest, I came with this specific problem of dealing with not coming from intermediaries, but from the endpoints, because I think that sometimes even for the minimization, there's the need to consider whether you actually need intermediaries to protect you from endpoints. But apart from this, I'm happy with the approach that was proposed of breaking it down and discussing specific points, so I can contribute maybe on what is more, nearer to my problem.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? And if you hear me typing, that's because I was trying to take some notes. Okay, I don't see anybody else on the queue, so I'll let you, Russ, conclude. But from my perspective, the situation, at least, is that we discussed the two areas of documents, principles and the threat model documentation. For the principal documents, we're calling for more reviews. People committed to do that. That's great. Thank you. We'll revise those reviews and comments. And after revision, we'll go to architects to discuss and see what the broader list thinks and possibly adopt later in IAB if that makes sense. And we heard good feedback today on the specifics, so we'll try and address that. On the threat model side, there seems to be agreement that this holistic full scope documentation is very difficult and maybe infeasible, but more specific documents on the specific components could be possibly done, but we need to see the document. So I think that's the next step on that side. And we heard some commitments to publish the document. So
Yeah, I think you've covered it. I don't think there's much else. I didn't hear anything else that was critical there.
okay, then we are out of time, and I'll try and ship the notes. I see a recording on, so I suppose we will get a recording at some point. I'll send the links, the notes and recording when I get them. So that's it. Thank you, and have a nice evening or night or morning or whatever it is.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.